Hey everyone, I'm Rena Ninen. Thank you for joining us. President Trump is expressing confidence in his talks with congressional leaders that they will ultimately lead to gun control legislation. Lawmakers have faced pressure to strengthen gun laws after mass shootings in El Paso, Texas. And Dayton claimed 31 lives last week. Mr. Trump called for what he's calling common sense background checks before he left for a fundraiser in New York. The president said both Democrats and Republicans want to do something.
We need intelligent background checks, okay? This isn't a question of NRA, Republican, or Democrat. I will tell you, I spoke to Mitch McConnell yesterday. He's totally on board. He said, I've been waiting for your call. He is totally on board. I spoke to senators that in some cases, people, friends of mine, but pretty hardline senators, hardline, and when I say that in a positive way, hardline on the Second Amendment. And they understand we don't want insane people, mentally ill people, bad people, dangerous people. We don't want guns in the hands of the wrong people.
Well, McConnell does appear to be on board with some form of gun legislation. The Senate Majority Leader told our radio affiliate WHAS in Louisville that he will engage in those discussions, but not until September.
When we get back, hopefully we'll be in a position to agree on things on a bipartisan basis and go forward and make a law.
So that means you're not calling people back in early for to address this gun legislation?
Well, if we did that, we'd just have people scoring points and nothing would happen.
But Democrats say they don't want to wait. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent a letter last night to the president demanding he use his constitutional powers to call the Senate back into session immediately to pass gun control legislation. I want to bring in Weijia Jiang at the White House, Bob Cusack in Washington. Weijia is, of course, our CBS News White House correspondent, and Bob, editor-in-chief of The Hill. So, Weijia, the president previously promised he'd increase background checks. This was after the Parkland shooting. He says that, he believes the NRA will get there. What makes him so optimistic?
Yeah, well, the president was specifically asked about this just a short time ago before he left here at the White House, and he said things are different. The Senate is different. The House is different. He thinks he's the same because you're right, he did make these calls before. So it seems like he's saying the climate somehow in the U.S. is different and the time is right now to do something about it. Of course, we have seen this play out time and time again, and he didn't really address what's different now. He said, if you look at what he said in the past, it wasn't as strong as what he's saying now. He's never been so passionate about passing something, some measure to have stronger background checks, and he kept using the word meaningful background checks are so critical right now. The problem, Rena, is that's all. These are just words, and he hasn't indicated what he means by common sense background checks, by meaningful background checks. And what we do know is that the NRA probably has a very different definition. And just yesterday, the CEO, Wayne LaPierre, released a pretty clear statement that said the current proposals being floated around are not ones that the NRA would get on board with. In fact, he called them soundbite solutions. In other words, solutions that sound great on camera but aren't practical when you're talking about enforcing them with the support of the NRA.
So, Bob, what's the sense of the appetite on Capitol Hill? What are Republicans saying?
Well, the president is right, is that both parties want to do something. It's just they want to do diametrically opposed things. The House, run by Democrats and Nancy Pelosi, they want to do big things. They want to do background checks that they've already passed, maybe reinstating the assault weapon ban. That nearly has 200 co-sponsors now, all Democrats, but that could pass certainly next month if they get the votes. And Republicans are talking about red flag legislation. This is more narrow legislation where you could red flag somebody who could be a danger. The NRA is certainly the wild card here. Trump and the NRA have a great relationship. NRA has been very loyal to Donald Trump, and he's going to remember that. But I do think that the president wants to do something. It's just you have this clash that it's likely to happen between the House and the Senate. Remember, Chuck Schumer said this week that just red flag legislation, which is bipartisan, that's not going to be enough for Chuck Schumer and Democrats. So a long way to go before anything even comes close to getting done.
And speaking of getting it done, Weijia, where exactly, when you talk about gun control legislation, particularly background checks, where is the president on this?
Well, he says that he's in favor of them. He says that something has to get done, and he doesn't care politically if that could cost him because he doesn't want crazy people having guns. But as we heard in his address, you know, he did seem to focus on red flag laws and on laws for those mentally disturbed. And so, again, when he laid out that 5-point plan just a few days ago in that teleprompter speech, those are all things that I think Republicans could get on board with. In fact, afterward, we know that executives with the NRA called up the White House and said, yeah, we were pleased with what we heard. But you know, as we just heard, that's not going to be enough for Democrats. And so what we're really waiting for is the meat of what President Trump means when he is calling for these stronger background checks. And we don't know that. We don't know if he's just talking about red flag laws, or if he's willing to take steps further and do things that, you know, would upset the NRA. So even though he was asked several times in several different ways before he took off for the Hamptons today, he just kept repeating himself, as he often does, saying, I'm looking for meaningful background checks. Again, what that means is unclear at this point.
Yeah, you know, with this uncertainty, though, Bob, I mean, what's the buzz on Capitol Hill? What are Republican leadership saying about how far they're willing to go? Are they talking about this?
Well, Mitch McConnell, in his interview yesterday, was indicating a bipartisan bill which was voted on years ago during the Obama administration on background checks, and it is supported by Joe Manchin and Pat Toomey. Mitch McConnell voted against that bill, and that bill fell a handful of votes short. There were a couple Democrats that voted against it, but there were mostly Republicans who rejected it. So Trump is the driver here. If he wants to get a bill and he formally supports a bill, then Mitch McConnell will bring that bill to the Senate floor. That's not going to go far enough for Democrats, and as I said, they're going to have a different House version, and then maybe they get in a conference and get something done. But the wild card here, too, is are we going to be talking about this next month when Congress comes back after Labor Day, or will we be talking about another current issue, and will this fade? Because usually it does fade and nothing gets done.
Yeah, you know, speaking of, you know, after Labor Day and looking at sort of the legislative calendar, the president said he's not ready to make a deal with China, Weijia. The next round of talks are set to take place in September. We know that the defense minister of the U.S. is meeting with the South Korean defense minister as well. When you talk China policy, you think of those farmers, you think of the folks in the heartland, you think of regular Americans who could be impacted by this. Where do we stand, and what's the appetite on dealing with China?
Well, you know, just about a week ago, the president sent a pretty clear message, and he said the remaining tariffs on the rest of the Chinese goods that currently are not being taxed will be. And so he is standing firm that, you know, he is willing to play out this trade war, whatever it takes, because right now, there is no deal. And we've been talking about this for so long now, and the president, you know, continues to say, oh, we're almost there, things are going well. But now he's really being firm in saying that, you know, we're going to have to see what happens in September, whether that meeting even happens still. And so it's clear he's playing hardball, and he insists that Americans aren't paying for it. But of course, in our reporting, we've talked to farmers, we've talked to Americans. That's not the case. You know, they're already feeling the effect here because, you know, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the additional costs that China would have to pay to purchase from these farmers, it makes sense that, you know, they have to look for other options as well. But the president is so confident that in the end it will be a boon for the U.S. that he is sticking by it.
You know, Bob, when you talk about, we just talked about the impact on regular Americans, from iPhones to the farmers. What are folks on the Hill saying about this? Do they like the president's tough rhetoric on China, and do they think ultimately it'll pay off?
They're getting impatient. Certainly Republicans from farm states think this is a risky move, but they want some type of resolution soon. And I think the chances of any type of deal with China this year are basically zero. And if you talk to people in the administration, they have moved on to some degree, at least for this year. They have moved on. They want to get the new NAFTA passed by Congress, the USMCA. There's a chance that could happen this year. But the talks with China have basically collapsed. And I think China is waiting out to see the next election, and they're going to see, okay, who is the nominee, and what are the chances that Trump will win re-election? Because right now, as the president has said himself, China is trying to wait him out.
Which I've got to ask you about immigration as well. The president was also asked about the immigration raids at meatpacking plants in Mississippi. Here's what he had to say.
I want people to know that if they come into the United States illegally, they're getting out. They're going to be brought out. And this serves as a very good deterrent. If people come into our country illegally, they're going out. They're not coming in illegally and staying. We have bad laws. They may get in, although we're being very tough, but they may get in. But it doesn't matter because they're going out. And when people see what they saw yesterday, and like they will see for a long time, they know that they're not staying here.
Weijia, raids like the one in Mississippi, is this something the White House plans to call on more regularly?
Well, the president himself has called on these more regularly. Of course, the thing is they've already been happening, but he claims that they're happening in bigger numbers and that more people are being arrested. You'll remember that at the end of last month, he publicized raids that were going to happen over a weekend. And, you know, he said things like, you won't believe how many immigrants that we're going to apprehend. It turned out to be a very small number. I think 35 arrests out of 2,000 migrants that were targeted on that list. But in this particular case, I think why it's getting attention is because children are being separated from their parents. And you'll remember, you know, at a real low point for this administration with immigration and their zero tolerance policy, that's why he had to backtrack that zero tolerance policy for families who came to the border and were being separated as the adults were detained. And people are very quick to point out that this is happening again in a very different form because they were already living here as a unit. But still, the bottom line is kids are now without their parents, and you know, that's extremely traumatic. But you did hear the president again say this is just the way it is. It's tough, but we have to send a message that this is what's going to happen if you come here illegally, and he really believes it's going to deter other families from coming here or trying to come here.
Yeah. Weijia, before you go, I want to ask you about an intelligence issue. The deputy director of the National Intelligence, Sue Gordon, submitted a handwritten resignation letter yesterday. The president's named Joseph McGuire as the acting director of National Intelligence after she stepped down after also Dan Coats. Do you get the sense McGuire is going to be holding this title for a while? Is he just a placeholder? What's the president's thinking? Does he want to fill this quickly?
Well, you know, Rena, I'll just point out the fact that Mick Mulvaney is still the acting chief of staff. Okay, so you know, we really don't know. The president just said today it could be a length of time, but who knows? You know, he thinks McGuire's going to do a great job, but didn't really commit to officially nominating him because that's not what the president does now. I mean, it almost seems like there's got to be a trial period, and you know, they really have to perform for him. And we know after the relationship we saw between Coats and the president that he wants someone who, frankly, he gets along with. That was not the case with Coats. The two butted heads in public many times over different policies and over, you know, news that about the intelligence community. And so I think the president has to feel McGuire out, but certainly won't commit to naming anybody. Although I should point out, the president also mentioned that everyone wants this job and people are waiting in line to vie for it.
All right, Weijia Jiang and Bob Cusack, thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Sure.